Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the DLC Drop podcast. Today it's my pleasure to welcome my good friend Justin Varghese. Justin has worked all throughout the esports ecosystem and now manages sales, marketing, and partnerships for Panda Global, which is a fighting game esports org. He's going to share tons of insights on how brands can effectively reach esports fans. Let's talk to Justin. Drop in the untold stories of industry leaders, influencers, and insights on future innovation. I'm John Davidson, and this is the DLC Drop Podcast. All right, Justin Varghese, welcome to the DLC Drop Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's, I've seen on LinkedIn constantly you putting these out. So when I got the call to actually be on one, I was very excited, to say the least. So Thank you so much for having me on.
My pleasure. I like the term constantly there with my LinkedIn content. I think I'll use that to describe my content strategy. Is
nothing but consistent. Nothing but consistent. It's basically the same. We got the same thing.
Absolutely. Well, and I think the best episodes are in person just because there's the energy of being in person. It's great to have people from around the world, but if I can get somebody in person, it's great. And I would also say for the audience, last time I saw you in person was randomly in Mexico.
Yeah, no, that was very wild, to say the least. I had gone to Puerto Vallarta on vacation, and for folks who have never been to Puerto Vallarta, if you want to do an Uber there is no designated Uber area within the airport. You have to cross a sky bridge and go next to this one small taco shop that's known for swordfish tacos. And only there can you call the Uber. So lo and behold, I had made the long trek across one sky bridge and then immediately back because it was the wrong one. Found myself next to this taco shop. And behind me, I hear a voice say, "Justin?" And it's you! What?
Yeah, my good friend Joseph Alexander was getting married. He was kind enough to include me in the wedding party. And so, I flew out to Puerto Vallarta by myself. I'm trying, not to wind up somewhere I don't want to wind up. And I'm like, I got to go across this bridge. And then the Uber will meet me there. Oh, this tacos smell good, And then I look and I'm like, Justin? And there we were. And we had a great vacation separately. We did not vacation together.
No. Yep. We were it's like I only saw you in front of that taco shop and then never again, which I guess makes sense because you spent all your time I'm assuming at the resort for your friend's wedding.
All inclusive.
Right.
Yep.
You got no reason to leave at that point.
The infinity pool was my friend.
Yeah, it was not all inclusive on our side, but Puerto Vallarta. I'm going to talk to you directly to the camera here. Puerto Vallarta. Awesome food scene. Make it happen.
Agreed. Well, I did not bring you here to talk about Puerto Vallarta.
Ah, dang.
But I did bring you here to talk about esports and marketing. And so today you handle sales, partnerships, and marketing for Panda Global. Tell us about Panda, because Panda is a little bit of a different org than, say, Envy or these other ones that we're mostly familiar with.
Yeah, I think Panda is a very, very unique organization, to say the least. Anybody that knows me knows that I've said for a long time I'm very bullish on esports as a whole, but very bearish on 99% of the teams that are out there. There's only a small handful of teams that I feel like I'd ever want to work for, that I even believe in, honestly, in regards to what their strategy looks like. And Panda is on that very short list.
Wow. Let me stop you there for really quick. What makes you bearish about others and bullish about Panda?
Oh, man. We're getting spicy.
We're getting in the deep waters right away.
I think that, the problem with a lot of other teams is that they have very high burn with very low amounts or processes and revenue streams, essentially, right? I mean, when you look at teams of all sizes, it's very clear that they have very big problems whenever it comes to accruing revenue from sponsors. You'll hear the win every now and then where, hey, we inked this non-endemic brand for 1 year. And then you could count on one hand the number that come back year over year, time over time.
Oh, yeah.
And then, even if we're looking at something like a per fan capitalization perspective, on that level, you can look at the data yourself. It's pretty abysmal for most of the teams that are out there, right? I think the way that they are approaching the fan engagement perspective of things is a little bit wonky.
Okay.
In my honest opinion.
Sure.
I think that, and I don't really feel like anything I'm saying is particularly too spicy of a take. I think that if you talk to most leaders at most of these teams, they'll agree that these are areas where they need to improve on.
Yeah.
And overall, when we talk about like the grand spectrum of things, I think that for as engaging and interactive of a medium as gaming is, it is very disappointing to me as somebody who works in partnerships to see a lot of these partnerships being anything but that, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it feels like the reason why brands are all of a sudden very interested in gaming is that it's not the NFL, right?
Yeah. It's where the eyeballs of youth are.
Exactly. But I feel like, you know, it's a little bit on us as partnerships people to educate and do our due diligence with the brand rather than quickly taking the easy money, if you will, to make it so we can create really cool, compelling activations together that get them to not only sign for year one, but stay on board for year 5 and belong.
Absolutely.
And beyond, right? And again, like, that's, I think, what intrigued me about Panda anyways, right? Very different. In regards to some of the higher costs and burn that's associated with a lot of these teams, Panda doesn't really have that, right? They're not paying out the wazoo for franchise fees because the spaces that they operate in are the 1v1 esports space, which is primarily grassroots.
The DLC Drop podcast is sponsored by Ice Shaker. I've been a huge fan of this brand for the past few years, ever since I met founder Chris Gronkowski. What I love about this product is the brand story, the functionality, and the customization. Ice Shaker is a Shark Tank company invested in by Mark Cuban and Alex Rodriguez, owned by NFL players Rob Gronkowski and Chris Gronkowski. I love using my ice shaker anytime I'm driving to the podcast studio, I'm going skateboarding, or I'm at the gym. No matter what I'm doing, it just does a great job of keeping my drinks hot or cold. The customization for ice shaker is something that's super unique. You can get any name, just about any logo engraved onto your ice shaker and delivered to you within just 3 to 5 business days. Get your own DLC Drop branded ice shaker at iceshaker.com/DLC Drop. Save 20% on all ice shaker products with the discount code DLC Drop. So you have less pressure to need dollars immediately because your overhead is lower, not having these high franchise fees.
Yes, okay. and what that allows you to do is be very creative with the ways you can redeploy that capital.
Right.
So when I think about a lot of other teams that have a very wide scope, I mean, some of these orgs do a phenomenal job of just casting a very wide net. You know, they have a little bit in everything. But what attracted me to Panda is the fact that they are very narrow in their focus, right? 1v1. So that's games like Smash Brothers, Street Fighter, Guilty Gear, even chess. But what they're able to do for those communities, because they have this extra capital available, is not just take part, but actively contribute and better the ecosystems that these communities are part of. So, you know, what does that mean, right? That's an awesome buzzword, I guess, that you can use for like a soundbite.
Justin, what does that mean?
No, but what it means is, you know, as a team, we're not just viewing things as this is our team that competes in these games. Would you like to be part of our jersey, right? We're looking at things from a very different lens. It means we're creating technology that makes it so that you can better understand the game itself. It means that we're being able to, you know, take big, huge, unorganized clusters of data and make it so it makes sense so that people have a better understanding in regards to everything from their matchup win rates to upsets, etc. Right? We're fundamentally changing, I think, the way that the game can be portrayed, and as a result, we're also opening up new avenues for partners to come in. While also creating new opportunities for fans to be able to take a look at their favorite game in a completely different lens, and as a result of that, consume new kinds of content as well. One of the things that I'm really proud of that we started doing is we have a partnership from a content perspective with Red Bull to create a bunch of white label content for them that's tied around using data and analysis, marrying it with storytelling to create these very interesting, compelling pieces about legends in the fighting game, fighting game space. And so
Super cool.
one of the pieces that we did was on Daigo.
Yep.
It was the first piece that we worked on. It was shortly after I joined. And that piece was released and to this day is one of Red Bull's most successful gaming content pieces ever, right? It was 500,000 organic views on YouTube, which is great, you know? And as a result of that, we just put out a press release on this. We're actually doing a lot more content pieces for them.
Yeah.
And it's exciting because those kinds of pieces are made possible because of the data and analytics that our team is able to uncover, married with the storytelling chops that our team has made over the past year in particular. So wax poetic about a whole bunch of stuff. But again, I think that when it comes to Panda, the model is totally different, right? I think everybody else is going left and we're going, not even going right? It's a totally different plane. And to me, that's what's very exciting personally.
Well, I think there's a lot of great business lessons in that, right? Because number one is how do you differentiate yourself is a pretty essential business lesson. You zig when others zag, for example. Another is it can be very tempting to want to please everybody. Right. And so you're like, I got to be in every game or I need all of these, different demographics. But one of the greatest strategies in business is to be the best in the world at the one thing. And then as demand comes, you evaluate where does it make sense for me to branch off to. Right. And so instead of being a mile wide and an inch deep, you're an inch wide and a mile deep.
Exactly.
And you can say, if you want to be in fighting games, we're the one.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there's other types of pitches. Do you think that, because one thing that is challenging for brands or brand marketers who don't understand gaming and just know they need to be in it, is they don't understand the games. Fighting games are very clearly obvious of what's going on. Do you think that helps you at all when you're approaching a brand, that like the person feels comfortable that they're not trying to watch Dota or League of Legends and they're watching two characters square off?
That's such a good question. And it's a conversation I was having with a coworker this morning, right? I think on one hand, getting somebody educated, because all of this game is all an education game, really, at the end of the day, right? I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, right? You do this on the daily, so you understand that it's all education.
Yeah.
I think that because the games that Panda operates in, despite the fact that they are games that have stood the test of time, 20 plus years with active, vibrant communities, they don't have the same lip service, especially from a publisher developer standpoint, the way that maybe a Riot would with a League of Legends. Right? They don't necessarily have that same oomph for a non-endemic when they read about Bugha winning $30 million at the Fortnite World Cup, right?
Well, that was a question I was thinking, because I'm like, if I'm head of partnerships for League of Legends or for Riot more broadly, I'm like, League and Valorant, let me tell you, the reach, the globalization, all of the things.
Yeah, it's one of those things where in the business circles, especially because of how much capital has been thrown there, I think the education from an upfront standpoint, the burden is definitely greater, I think, on our side at Panda, because it's more than just gaming. When you say esports, there's, it's a miracle sometimes for some of the non-endemic brands. There's like, oh, esports, you mean like Ninja? It's like, well, no, not quite. Let's wind that back a little bit, But if you're selling something like Fortnite, then it's like, oh, yeah, he's one of the people that is a well-known content creator within this space.
Yep.
For us, it's like, let's take several steps back and let's talk about, maybe something you didn't read in a Forbes article. And then we have to, convince during that pitch, essentially, like, here's why this thing you probably haven't heard that much about, why it actually matters, and why you should be hearing about it and will be hearing a lot more about it in the future.
Yeah.
And I think that the way that results overall for us is, while it might be a little bit harder at the top of the pipeline whenever it comes to bringing in new folks immediately.
Yeah.
I think our retention is pretty monstrous, right? Like, you think about a partner like Geico, for instance, right? Non-endemic as they come.
Heard of them. Yeah.
And they've been partnered with Panda for going on 6 years now.
Wow.
And it's very hard for me to think about in the whole spectrum of esports, you can maybe count on one hand the number of partnerships that make it past year 5, let alone year 3.
Sure.
You know, especially a non-endem like that. And the reason why is because we're able to show them very clearly, like, look, you took a chance on this, you took a chance on this community, but once they're in, they get it, right? They see just how engaged they are, they see the diversity. So it's a little bit easier, I think, on the retention side as a result of that, you know?
Yeah, I think another business lesson is it's a lot easier to keep a customer than it is to get or less expensive for sure.
Yes.
And so what we see historically with esports teams is, number one, all these statistics are a little overblown, I would say. Rosy-colored glasses. I would
Optimistic.
say lacking context.
Sure.
Right? I remember when I was at GameStop, I'm looking at all these reports coming out. And it's like, okay, we're dealing with a digital ecosystem, which means everything can be measured, right? And I can't get a number for North America. Like, every number is global. And it's like, if available statistics are not available, there's a reason.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's very different going to a CMO and saying 500 million gamers, or going down to North America or their DMA and saying Call of Duty or Overwatch.
Sure.
Or whatever. Right? And so what happens is you get somebody to pay for a partnership, but then there's a struggle to report back, to activate with excellence, to maximize that partnership. I think a lot of that just has to do with people who don't have a ton of experience. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, there's something wrong with an industry that, struggles there. But that critique isn't like throwing shade. It's simply, there's no substitute for years of experience.
Oh, I agree.
And people with experience rarely understand gaming because they're older. It's just a whole different vibe, different structure, everything. And then you have people who get it, but they just have not activated partnerships for a very long time.
Yeah.
And so you get these people sign on and then they leave because it's like, wait a minute, this isn't the thing that I thought it was. So you're doing a lot of education. How are you articulating like the realistic opportunity with Panda specifically?
I mean, as a partnerships team, we have a motto, and that's under promise, over deliver. I think that, there are bad actors within this space that throw a lot of smoke and mirrors. Sure. And they use bad data to convince people with money to take a chance on them. And then lo and behold, there's blowback whenever they're not even able to hit a fraction of what they promised, more or less, And we never want to be in that position because, like you said, it really does cost a lot more to bring on a new partner versus keeping somebody happy and growing that partnership over time. As we're having the conversation, like, we have no problem showing what the metrics look like. In fact, we're very open to it because that helps us like further cement our case. I'd say that because Panda is one of those teams that's growing so much, right? And it doesn't necessarily have like that VC backed name recognition, right? That maybe some of these other teams do.
Sure.
We do have to go that extra mile in regards to opening our books and proving who we are. But the good news is when you do that, you can see that, oh, wow, on engagement, Panda's absolutely crushing. Like, I love to use it as a metric that the gold standard in esports for engagement on Twitter, as an example, is 1%. And so when Panda like regularly hits 5% engagement on Twitter, it's like, cool, we're 5xing without even trying at that point. And then having that continue to show up again and again in other elements of our team, like YouTube content, for instance, right? The fact that we created a fighting games channel less than a year ago and it's already outplacing very established teams' YouTube channels is very funny, But I bring all this up, not to flex, but to show that like we have to show the numbers, right? We have to quantify time and time again so that people understand, like, it's not smoke and mirrors, even if this isn't a team that you maybe have that much familiarity with, here's why it matters, and here's why it's actually going to be very top of mind moving forward.
Yeah, I find that just like as humans in general, we do what we have to do.
Sure.
Right? And so if we have the luxury of the big following, which, I mean, to give those teams credit, they did build those followings. So kudos to them for having the huge following. But if you're bringing in partnerships just by saying, look at the the Twitter account, look at our content creators, etc. It's easy to get lazy, you could say. And it sounds to me like because you guys have to try a little harder because of you're not the the household name currently, that you deliver, and then that works to get people in because you are delivering.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It makes it an easy sale in the long term.
100%. And, going back to what you said earlier, right? I think that with Panda in particular, something that you and I definitely agree on is that it's not a brand necessarily that's the best fit for every single person, right? Or point. I think that it's one of those brands that is an amazing fit for the right kinds of partners, and those are the kinds of partners that our team wants to work with, right? I think that one of the X factors beyond the ways that Panda's doing things differently, something that maybe doesn't come together when you look at just the data itself. Something that I think is very valuable is the fact that Panda, because of the role that it plays within these communities that it operates in, has built an unbelievable amount of community equity, right? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, it's led us to do very cool things. Like whenever we had launched that controller, we hit our Kickstarter goals in less than an hour for that, right? Wow. Because the community believes in us so much. And ultimately, what we are looking to do is not just have a conversation that's, join Panda, you'll get this many eyeballs. I mean, that's part of it for sure. But I think the X factor beyond that is also the fact that we have built this community equity. Any partner that we bring on, we want to go the extra mile and tell our community why it matters so that we can leverage our community equity to have them buy further into your brand, That's
right. Well, and you also don't want to betray the trust of the community who's entrusted that with you.
Absolutely.
And so I find that when I talk to brands, I always say the experience of the community have to be better as the result of your brand being part of this than before your brand was involved.
Yes.
And I think what you're saying is a lot of why you have this super high level of engagement and trust from the community is because you as Panda have supported this industry for a very long time. I do want to get into a little bit about how FGC is a little bit different
very different
than the rest. And because it is consistent with what you're saying of you guys have supported this almost a subsection of this subculture, right? Yeah. And there's even a debate a little bit about is FGC esports?
I mean, it's the birthplace of it,
right?
let's be honest, right?
Yeah. Get into it. Let's hear it.
So FGC, fighting game community for folks who maybe aren't indoctrinated. When I think about competitive gaming, I think it really started there, right? Yeah. Because if you think about arcades, one of the first head-to-head games ever was Street Fighter.
That's right.
That's a fighting game. It's the first time you got to, put your quarters next to somebody else and see who was better.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a community that has, again, stood the test of time. It's been here for decades.
Right.
And for a majority of that time, it's been without any publisher or developer support or limited. Now, the winds are changing on that, right? More and more publishers and developers are recognizing that this is a huge opportunity. And as a result, we've seen really cool moves being made. One thing I gotta definitely give a shout out to is, Capcom, for instance. They were able to put on the Street Fighter League and they brought on Arby's as a partner for that, right? Yeah. And it worked out because a Street Fighter term is meaties. Yep. And so Arby's, we have the meat. It was a perfect kind of synergy there,
Arby's also, I don't know if weirdly is the right word, but their social media is super gaming focused.
Yes.
But none of the rest of the brand is. If you weren't on their social and you just saw their commercials, you'd be like, we have the meats, and they've got these really funny commercials, but they've got this incredible marketing going on social. And I think they were they pouring, was it either Game Fuel or they had a game specific soda in at least for a while in the restaurants.
Oh, that's cool.
But it's funny because somebody who's not super familiar with gaming or the marketing in the space would be like, Arby's, that's random, a sandwich shop. But if you know about it, it's like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Total sense.
And I love how the terminology crosses over there too.
Oh yeah, I think the agency is Moxie, if I remember right, that handles all of that.
I think you're right.
They do awesome work. They do awesome
They're
work
incredible
for sure. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely think that when it comes to fighting games, they're the birthplace of esports, in my opinion, right? Yeah. They are the birthplace of competition. They're the bedrock. Now, where there is, I think, a bit of a divide is the FGC part of esports? Does the FGC even want to be part of esports, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's just like a weird definition kind of thing. Ultimately, I think if we look at the fighting game community in particular, right, which is, in my opinion, as somebody who's been to a lot of different esports events throughout the years, I think that the energy from the fighting game community is just so unique. It is, from the 1v1 scene in general, it is so unique. It's infectious.
What's different about it?
I think that it's the fact that they have to prove themselves. That you know what I mean? Like I think it's the fact that when you look at other scenes, for the most part, most of these games are very exclusive.
Yeah.
The people that can compete at the biggest tournament for Overwatch League, for instance, are invited teams, rosters of, five or so players, right? Whereas in fighting games, the biggest tournament at the moment is EVO.
Yeah.
That's an open entry tournament.
We could roll up.
Yeah. The fact that somebody listening to this podcast right now could hear this talk, buy a copy of Street Fighter, show up at EVO, and then be paired against Daigo. Like, that's so cool when you think about it, right?
Well, that's such a great opportunity for brands to really support the community, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times what will happen is a brand strategy accidentally only supports the pro players. And there's nothing for the community because that pipeline isn't there.
Yes.
But this is organically built in, and you can really say, hey, I'm going to help you compete at a higher level, like on a bigger stage, more often, have these opportunities. I think that is so strong for brands.
Super cool, right? And again, it goes back to what I was saying with gaming being such an interactive medium, right? I think as a brand and also as a partnerships person, you kind of have to do everything in your power to make sure that you can engage as best as possible, right?
Right.
Get creative, get a little out there, try some weird stuff.
Yeah.
Gaming is the perfect conduit for sure, and I think that a lot of brands would be remiss if they didn't try to do some of the weird stuff, because that's the stuff, in my opinion, that works very well, that people talk about.
What are some examples, one or two, of campaigns, specifically with non-endemics, that you've seen that you think were done really well?
Yeah, one that was interesting to me was back when I was at DreamHack. I really liked how Chipotle activated off of DreamHack Dallas and I believe DreamHack Atlanta as well. So they had this thing. It was a twofold activation, right? The first set of the activation was kind of tied to your everyday audience, right?
Okay.
And that was the Chipotle Challenger Series. And the idea was anybody at any time could come up and enter this free-to-enter tournament. And the winner, after a weekend of competition, would get free Chipotle for a year, right? Super cool. They'd bring out some influencers. I believe for the Atlanta show, they brought out Courage to present the trophy and things like that. So it was a very cool way to engage with, your everyday gamer that happened to be a DreamHack in an authentic way.
Right.
But I really liked the fact that on top of that, they coupled it with a more influencer-focused activation simultaneously. So what they did was they bought out the catering contract of the venue, and they turned our VIP lounge into the Chipotle VIP lounge. So they basically put in like a Chipotle there where you could order Chipotle. They had all these, really comfy chairs, places where you could watch. So it's supposed to be an oasis for influencers, top players, talent, etc., to just relax. And it was super cool because they didn't ask anybody. It wasn't like you had to tweet to enter or something like that. But it was one of those things where, because they did it, people would naturally just talk about it at a higher level,
Super smart.
And it was a nice way for the brand to essentially build a lot of value and a stronger relationship with higher level creators and influencers and players who would then tell their followers. So you have, again, two different campaigns, but they work synonymously. And the end goal I thought was very interesting because it's a little bit of experiential stuff that obviously has a digital component to it as well. And it also is experiential at an influencer level, which of course converts to traction on Twitter and things like that. So I like that one a lot. It's interesting.
I like that. You're essentially you're giving people more opportunities to compete. You've got everybody loves Chipotle anyway.
I went there way too many times whenever I was at DreamHack.
Yeah, you've got this cool option to win a bunch of free stuff. You can order there on site, which is just kind of fun.
Yeah.
And then specifically with the influencers and the top pros, it's a unique experience. It's solving a pain point. I think that's one of the greatest activations at like big events.
Yeah.
Is what are the pain points? Like one easy one is, do we all need our phone charged?
Yes.
Another is nobody's got Wi-Fi. So it's a shout out to our mobile friends. Like sponsor these events, provide some Wi-Fi. But what are the other things that just like kind of suck about an experience that you can make it good or better as your brand providing that solution? I think that's pretty easy, but it's also very effective.
Yeah, and again, I think it differs event by event, right?
Sure. Yeah.
You know, for some events, like you said, it is just having an access to a charger. For other events, it's what's like a comfy place that's within the arena, but like a little bit removed enough where I can still pay attention to the game, but relax a bit, right away from the hustle and bustle. Like,
right.
You know, I think that once we get away from like booths and more into experiences, like that's when you're able to really open up a lot of possibility, right? Because then it's no longer like, oh, here's a 10x10, I guess, you know, put some kind of something in there. Yeah, and have somebody stand behind this tablecloth essentially and talk about your brand, right? But what, as soon as you can get past that, right, and create some sort of space where like people feel really excited and they kind of want to tinker and explore, like that's when you can make some real magic happen.
Well, and then you could be on the walls of that event with user-generated content.
Yes.
Where I always say, you know, when you can provide these unique experiences, it's like social currency. Because people are going to have an opportunity to take that selfie and post it. They're getting validated by the likes. They're getting validated by their friends who aren't there, getting some FOMO. And your brand gave that to them.
Yes.
And so now they have a feeling of gratitude towards you to embrace you.
Exactly, man. Like you know, at the end of the day, if you can be the reason why somebody has a core memory that they cherish.
Yeah.
If you're like the reason why they essentially have this ability, like I think the loyalty that you get as a brand at that small level is massive. Absolutely. And then the fact that like you no longer have somebody who just buys your products but actively evangelizes them, like that totally shifts the game. You know?
Yeah, you can't beat that. We have a very skeptical audience here.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
But what I tell people is like when you do it the right way, they're going to champion you in ways that nobody else will.
Yeah.
Because you help them do what they love doing more so.
And I think that if we have to go back to like the FGC, is it esports conversation, like skepticism is at the heart of that, right? You have a community that feels so tightly knit. Mm-hmm. And I think that the concern for a lot of them is like, oh, like we don't want to like lose like the flair that makes us who we are, right? We'd hate to be in, you know, when they think esports, they think like super buttoned up, you know, like very rigid structures, etc. And you know, I know for a lot of like thought leaders in this space, like their end game, like what they vision as the promised land for esports looks like an NFL, looks like an NBA. But for me, it looks more like a UFC or a WWE, honestly, right? Yeah. And under that model, like that cannot exist if the FGC is drained of the flair. It needs those personalities, you know? And ultimately, that when I talk to people and especially to brands about the FGC, like that's what I say time and time again is look at the interviews from somebody from, you know, a quote unquote tier one esport, juxtapose that with how people interact in the FGC, and you'll know why it's a very different space immediately. Yeah. The energy is so different. The people that are there are very different.
It's unfiltered.
Exactly.
That's one thing I really love about esports compared to traditional sports. I roll my eyes a little bit. Right now, the NBA, you know, playoffs are going on. And so it's like when you do the interview, let's say Luka Doncic, Dallas Mavericks, what's happening right now is the Warriors are beating the crap out of the Mavs. And Luka's dropping 40 points every game, and he's not getting a lot of help, and they're losing. Okay. Well, if Luka in this NBA world, if he says, I'm not getting any help, which is true and honest, oh, he's not a good leader. And he, and also if he's like, the Warriors suck and, throwing a little trash, then he's going to be criticized for that as well. And it's too filtered. It's not real. It's scripted, right? And it just it's like, what's the point of these interviews? One of the things I love about esports is the trash talk.
Yes.
Like, I like to talk a little trash myself. Anybody wants to come over, play some pool at my house, prepared to get whipped and hear about it while it's happening. But I just love the fact that these guys are on stage, they're calling each other out, and it's not exactly PC all the time, but it's real. And I love that. And I think one of the concerns is that as the space grows, as these bigger brands get involved, they're like, you can't say that anymore. And then we've lost the thing that's made it so great.
Exactly. And again, that's why I love looking at UFC, WWE as like an endgame model, because, ultimately, and even back when I was a caster, I'd say this a lot, right? Our job is to get people to care about pixels. Mm-hmm. And if you take players who may or may not have a vibrant personality and you lock them away in practice dungeons where they can't really interact with people, they can't build their own followings, etc.
Yeah.
No wonder the end content of their interview is going to be sterilized and boring, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're taking what is ultimately one of your best assets and removing it off of the table. And again, like it goes back to what I was saying earlier, where looking at Panda in particular, right? I think that if you're trying to appeal to every single brand in the world, right, then I don't feel like you can put out the best possible product you can, Right. And I, honestly, like when we're looking at like fighting games and stuff, it's not about like having infinite logos, right? It's like okay, like what are the handful of partners that you can work with? How can you maximize ultimately what their investment is in you and what they get as a result of that, and how can you do that while doing well by the community as well?
Right.
And I have to clarify this as well, right? Like I think that there's obviously a lot of opportunities in regards to things you can improve in the fighting game space, right?
Sure.
But that doesn't have to come at the cost of the personality and the soul that makes it unique.
Right. That's perfectly said. You're talking a lot about the education that has to happen around these brands to bring in sponsors and stuff like that. I want to get your take on something. Part of that education is setting expectations properly.
Yes. Oh my God.
Right. And so how are you with brands having these conversations and effectively setting expectations?
Honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying.
What are they? What are some of those expectations?
Yeah. Well, I think that again, like the biggest, whenever we try to operate as a team, right, especially from a partnerships perspective, I will say that the way Panda works is that there is no gold, silver, bronze package or anything like that, right? Like we try to make things as customized as possible.
Yep.
So what that results in is us having to have a conversation directly with marketing decision makers in regards to what's important. What have you tried in the past? Well, what's typically worked really well? What are things you want us to stay away from? What does the budget look like? I think when you have that kind of a conversation, it naturally leads to an open and honest environment between both parties, right?
Yep.
And from that early conversation is when you can level set.
Right.
There's too many times I've seen, especially I think it's most egregious probably in the influencer space, where you'll have like some brands say, oh, with this amount of spend, you can get all these kinds of creators. And then after the contract is signed, it's like, well, here's actually who you can get, right? And we see it all the time. And, you'll have like, the poor agencies that come back to you is like, hey, I know this is an impossible task, but is there any way? It's like, no, absolutely not. I've always found that if you're open and honest up front, like maybe it reduces the pipeline again at the top.
Sure.
But the amount of people that convert and stay loyal to what you're building is so much greater, and it leads to a lot less headache on both sides, is how I expect it. So yeah.
Well, there's something too that just like dismissing a lead like early on as well, right? Like how much time are you spending chasing something that ends up being a no if you can just at the very beginning, in an appropriate way, of course, distinguish, okay, we're not going to do business together. I'm going to spend my time, my effort with these others who are more likely to do work together.
Win fast, lose fast.
Right.
It's a good mantra.
I think too, the space is always improving and evolving, and our business practices are always improving as well. But in the past, it's been said, your main metric should not be sales. You're initially, right? Like the long-term play is sales. The short-term play is these softer metrics, affinity, growing your social followings, positive sentiment, things like that. I always try to advise our industry that we also need to see things from the brand's perspective as well. It can't just be, you should support my thing because I love it. It's like, well, the reason why they're spending these sponsorship dollars is because they're going to make more money if they spend them with you than if they don't, or if they spend them somewhere else. So how do you kind of tackle that? This is what you're getting out of a sponsorship. This is because it feels nice and fluffy and good to say, yeah, in 3 years, you'll be able to drive sales with this. And I would say, I'm going to be out of a job in 3 years if I'm not getting sales from the sponsorship. So can you help me a little bit of like, what is that meeting in the middle of accurate expectations, but also giving the brand like what they're asking for, the reason they're sponsoring?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that, especially when you get to the contracting phase, right? That's when you establish what you have to do, right? We are, based on your goals, we're going to get you X amount of impressions. We're going to do these kinds of content pieces, right? All that kind of stuff gets hammered in between like the initial proposal to the refined proposal to contract, right? The way you do well by the brands goes back to something that I said earlier. That's the mantra that our team abides by, and that's under promise, over deliver. When it comes to Geico as an example, they have specific metrics that we want to hit for them. One of the reasons why we've been able to keep their business over the last 6 years is that by month 8, we've already exceeded those expectations.
Wow.
Right?
Cool. Yeah.
And again, like that comes with being very realistic about what your capabilities are. That means sometimes you have to say no to brands that are offering you money because what they're asking and what you can do, they don't align at the end of the day. And again, I think that that's one of the things that separates a sponsor from a partner. When it's a sponsor, it's very much a one-sided relationship. You give me money and that's the end of it. Maybe I'll talk to you in 9 to 10 months when it's renewal time. Right? When it's a partnership, you're iterating together. Yeah. You're trying things constantly. You're sharing what works, what doesn't work. You're willing to explore what a potential pivot could look like from a strategy standpoint, right? Yeah. That's the end game here. And that's why I say it's an education game all the way through, right? The relationship at first is you're educating these brands on who you are, why the space you're in matters, why these games matter. But then there's also the education on the other side in regards to who the brand is, why that may or may not be a good fit on our side. And then especially post-contract, it's teaching each other together, how do we work together? What are the plays that we make together that do really well by this community, et cetera? It has to be that dialogue constantly, in my opinion.
Well, and I think when you have two groups of people who have a high willingness for both to be successful, right, is when this works. There's going to be times through this process where you have to pivot, right? Yeah. You try something, and if it's not working, are you going to shout at each other and cancel the contract and all of these things? Or are you going to say, hey, what are other options here? How can we, adjust and deliver? One of my favorite strategies with that is simply, is a crawl, walk, run, right? Which is, hey, let me try a little bit. You get started by taking your first step and you kind of figure that out. And then you identify, oh, this is really, there's a lot of great metrics here that we're realizing. We're getting a lot of great results. Let's double down and go there. Is that a process you employ or something different?
Absolutely. And there have been, there's been money that we've left on the table because they want to run immediately, and at the end of the day, like, we know for a fact that if we ran immediately and we produced an activation that was not reflective of our brand, and that's negative for both of us. Yeah. I think that there is tremendous power in being able to say no.
Absolutely.
Tremendous power. And that, I mean, as a consultant, I'm sure you know that firsthand as well, right?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, you say yes to everything. There's, you become something other than what you were intended to be.
Agreed.
Right. I had a really great experience with a design studio I was part of a while back, and the owner did not have so much an idea of what he wanted the studio to be as much as a great idea of what he didn't want it to be. And that was even more powerful, because he essentially said, I don't want to be the owner of a company I'm not stoked on. I don't want to work on stuff that sucks to work on and just, I got to pay the bill, so I got to take on this project. Now, not everybody has that luxury all the time, especially when you're starting out. You're going to have to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
Right. But I think it is extremely smart to identify, who are you? What do you want to do? And does this partnership or does this activation further my mission or help me live that? Or is it a distraction? And yeah, it'd be nice to have those dollars today, but am I staying true to myself? Am I staying true to my org?
Exactly.
I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, beyond that, there's so many different entities that's tied to it now, right?
Yeah.
Even when we're looking at like the circuit that we're building, I guess can I plug the circuit now?
You can.
Cool. Yeah.
Let's do it.
So near the tail end of 2022, Panda announced that it had established a partnership with Nintendo to be the first entity, gaming or otherwise, to create the first licensed circuit for Super Smash Bros. In North America.
Yeah.
Huge.
You're stoked. You're a Super Smash player yourself.
I mean, that's how I started.
Yeah.
That's how I started, was a player, then play-by-play commentator. And so, joining Panda to help on this has been a bit of a homecoming of sorts in that sense.
Yeah.
But that's been very exciting, because ultimately when we're designing that, when you talk about being able to do right by people, it's not just doing right by us as Panda, right? Mm-hmm. But it's also doing right by Nintendo, who's been gracious enough to trust us with one of the most successful IPs in history, which is a conglomerate of also some of the most successful IPs in history.
Exactly.
It's doing right by the community that has propelled Panda to the point where we're able to take on tasks like this. And it's also doing right by an audience that I consider uninitiated, right? When we look at data from Smash.gg, it shows that 750,000 unique competitors went to a major tournament in the year 2019, which is huge from a numbers standpoint. It actually means that from a foot traffic perspective, it's among the most attended esports events per aggregate. Right?
Wow. Yeah.
And that doesn't include spectators. That doesn't include locals, right? It's just major tournaments in person.
Yeah.
And while that's an awesome number, I think about the fact that, Smash Ultimate is, I'll have to double check the numbers again, but it's like 30 plus million sales, right? For Ultimate alone.
Sure. Yeah.
And to me, like, the exciting thing that I think about is, man, of the 40 million Nintendo Switches that are in the United States, most of those owners, by a massive amount, have never gone to a Smash event before.
Good
so
point.
we have to do an event that's not just a great Smash event. It's not just a great esports event, right? We have to put on a circuit that is truly spectacle, that brings in people of all walks of life for the first time and gets them to understand why we care so much as well.
I just so encourage people to attend, because there's something about in person. Like, we can, even us over here on the business side of things, we can get distracted and sometimes forget the core reason of why we're doing it. Yeah. Which is people competing at the highest level in video games against each other, right? And boy, people think, oh, it's boring or slow or whatever. A live event rivals a hockey game with the energy in there. And I would just very much encourage anybody listening to this, like, go. And especially with fighting games, like, I went to a League of Legends event in Houston, the spring final, not too long ago, and it was awesome. I don't play League of Legends. Now, I understand, like, what's going on with the game, but if you've never played or you don't have the first clue, like, it's hard to understand. But with Smash, everybody's gonna know what's going on. So, like, whether you're a father and your kid's super into it, whether you heard about esports and, like, you're trying to learn, or whether you've been doing it from day one, everybody needs to go.
Exactly.
It's gonna be a great time.
Exactly. And I know I'm very biased. Yes. I know I'm extremely biased here, but especially when we're talking about Smash and fighting games, I mean, this is a massive audience. Nielsen data shows that it's the most diverse audience in all of gaming and esports, and also has the highest household income as well.
Wow.
Which is awesome. But paradoxically, because these are all grassroots communities, it's not logo soup yet. Which means that as a brand, if you're able to buy in early, the value that you get off of that is incredible.
True.
In addition to that brand affinity that
greater
you're
share
also.
of voice, because there's not as many voices in the room.
Exactly. Exactly.
I know we got to wrap this up in a few minutes. I could talk to you forever. We've talked a lot about partnerships and brands specifically on this episode. If there's one thing that we haven't covered that you would want brands to hear, whether that's why Panda's awesome, we've talked quite a bit about that, or if it's strategy, or if it's something else, what would you want people to come away from this episode knowing?
For brands, do your due diligence. It doesn't hurt us at all. We're very upfront with what our numbers are, but any team that you're talking to, any entity that you're talking to, really do your due diligence. You know, John brought it up earlier in the podcast, but like if you're just going by a Twitter follower count, you're setting yourself up to make some really big mistakes. So the first thing, again, I'd say do due diligence.
What are some of so we talked about engagement, right? What are, when people are doing their due diligence, what are some of those things that they should be looking at?
Very vaguely, I'd say numbers that are not presented in the deck, right?
Okay.
If a brand is saying this is what our reach looks like, you know, check that. See what you know on a tweet. How many likes do they get on a tweet, right? How many people are truly engaging with what they say on their YouTube content, right? How you can look at like the viewership and then contrast that with how many people are liking and commenting with other videos, for instance. That way, you know, is this just boosted? Because there's plenty of groups out there that will just boost the views in order to hit the minimums that they've issued out by their sponsors, because the organic buy-in from their community does not exist.
Wow.
Like, I'm serious. Just take the extra time. You know, it obviously is more work on your side, and I know that you'd want to assume that everybody is truthful, and there's a lot of great, amazing people, awesome teams in this space as well, awesome organizations, but there's definitely some bad actors there. So I would make sure that you verify as much as possible, do that due diligence. If I had to give one more piece of advice to the brands, again, like, especially if you're coming from traditional sports, I know what's comfortable and what's easy is what you've done in traditional sports. I would challenge you to think a little bit more outside of the box here. Again, the thing that people look at initially and why they're attracted is the fact that it's a younger audience, but don't let that take away from the fact that this is a highly engaged audience as well.
Yeah.
And so you're doing yourself a disservice if you're just concerned about the eyeballs without imploring how you can take advantage of the fact that they are so engaged.
Okay. Is there one key you can give that you should do? Like, okay, traditional sports is doing this. One little tease or snippet of consider this.
Oh, that's really tough because, again, it depends on the brand, right?
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say, like, this is a catch-all that every brand should do. I'd say that if there are ways that you can get the attendees specifically and make it so that any of your plays are targeted at more than just, like, the top 0.001%,
right?
That's massive, right? Because if you look at, like, people that go to a basketball game, maybe not everybody has the confidence to shoot hoops in front of everybody.
Sure.
But everybody that's at a gaming event is very welcome and eagerly looking forward to the next time they can play games. So if you can
they want to play
that,
themselves.
Exactly.
Enable competitive experiences for the fans. To play maybe with pros, against each other. Unique experiences.
100%, right? You know, and that goes again, like maybe like if part of your deal with a team involves some kind of pro, like see if you can take that next step and marry, like you said, John, marry the opportunity to like meet the pro, make it more than just a signing session. Give a fan a chance to play against their favorite player, and the content you'll get from that is incredible, and what you can do from that is beyond comparison. I think
the last thing to piggyback on that, which you teased there, is always have a content strategy.
Yes,
and optimize for mobile. Because everybody is going to be watching these on their phones. That's perfect. How can people follow you and follow Panda in the ways that you would like them to?
Sure thing. You can find at Panda Global on pretty much every platform.
Yep.
You can find me at jvarg, JVARG 1990 on every platform, including LinkedIn.
Yep.
And if you need to learn more information about Panda beyond that, panda.gg.
Perfect. All right. Well, man, tons of knowledge dropped in this episode, just one after another. I so appreciate you joining me today on the DLC Drop podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's been a treat.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening to the DLC Drop podcast. This podcast is part of the Esports Future I Podcast Network and produced by Innovation Media Enterprises. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave us a review.